Deafening sound of camera flashes echoed through the marble lobby of the Plaza Hotel when Ethan Caldwell exploded like a social bomb. "I'm already married. Damn it." The 2-year-old tech mogul's shout cut through the air like a blade, making every reporter at the press conference fall silent instantly. Even the waiters stopped serving champagne. Ethan, heir to a digital empire that stretched from Silicon Valley to Wall Street, was fed up with questions about his love life. Fed up with speculation about when he'd settle down. Fed up with being treated like a trophy in Manhattan's high society dating market. "Where is she?" asked a blonde journalist from the front row, arching a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. Panic flooded Ethan's blue eyes. Dang it. He just painted himself into the corner of all corners. His PR team was probably having collective heart attacks behind the cameras. That's when he spotted her, standing by the marble pillar, partially hidden behind a fake potted palm, was a woman with unruly chestnut curls escaping from what looked like a hastily assembled bun. She wore thick-rimmed glasses, a wrinkled blazer that had seen better days, and was furiously scribbling in a notepad while trying to balance a coffee cup that was clearly too full. She was perfect, perfectly ordinary, perfectly there. Without thinking, which his business partners would argue was Ethan's greatest talent and biggest flaw, he strode across the lobby like a man on a mission. "There you are, sweetheart," he announced, his voice carrying that confident boom that had closed billion-dollar deals. The woman looked up, startled, her hazel eyes wide behind her glasses. Coffee sloshed dangerously in her cup. "I'm sorry. What?" she began, but Ethan was already there, his arms sliding around her waist with the confidence of a man who'd never been told no in his life. The cameras swiveled toward them like heat-seeking missiles. "My wife," Ethan declared, pulling her closer. She smelled like lavender and determination, an oddly intoxicating combination. "Sorry we're late, honey. Traffic was terrible." The woman, whose press badge read Nora Harper, Tech Chronicle, stared at him like he'd grown a second head, which, considering the circumstances, wasn't entirely unreasonable. "Your wife?" Nora's voice came out as a strangled whisper. "Kiss me," Ethan murmured urgently, his smile never wavering, even as his eyes pleaded with her. "Please. I'll explain everything. Just play along." Nora Harper had covered tech scandals, corporate meltdowns, and startup disasters that would make grown men weep. She'd interviewed senators, CEOs, and at least 3 people who claimed to have invented Bitcoin, but nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared her for Ethan Caldwell's lips against hers in front of 50 cameras and the entire New York press corps. The kiss was supposed to be for show, a quick peck to sell the lie. Instead, it felt like lightning striking twice in the same place. When they broke apart, the room erupted in questions, flashes, and what sounded suspiciously like applause from someone in the back. Nora stared at Ethan, her notepad forgotten, coffee cup miraculously still intact in her death grip. "What?" she whispered. "Have you just done?" Ethan's trademark confident smile flickered for just a moment, revealing something raw and slightly terrified underneath. "I have absolutely no idea," he admitted, "but I think we're about to find out together." Manhattan, New York. The next day, Nora Harper stared at her laptop screen in her cramped studio apartment, watching her own face kiss Ethan Caldwell for the 100th time. The video had gone viral overnight. Her Caldwell wife was trending on Twitter. Instagram was flooded with speculation, and her phone hadn't stopped buzzing since 6 a.m. Nora Harper, from unknown journalist to tech mogul's secret wife in one kiss, screamed the headline on page 6. She groaned and buried her face in her hands. Her press credentials were probably toast. Her editor at Tech Chronicle was probably planning her funeral, and somewhere in his penthouse, Ethan Caldwell was probably regretting every life choice that led to yesterday's disaster. Her doorbell rang. Nora shuffled to the door in her NYU sweatshirt and pajama pants, expecting her neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, with another complaint about her late-night typing. Instead, she found herself face-to-face with Ethan Caldwell himself, looking annoyingly perfect in a navy suit, despite the early hour. "We need to talk," he said, holding up 2 coffee cups from Brew Haven. "I brought bribery." "How did you get my address?" Nora asked, though she stepped aside to let him in. "I'm a tech mogul. I have resources." Ethan paused, looking suddenly uncertain. "That sounded creepy, didn't it?" "I asked your editor. Professionally, not creepily." Nora's tiny apartment had never felt smaller. Ethan Caldwell, who probably owned buildings taller than her entire block, was standing in her living room looking like he'd stepped out of a magazine ad. Meanwhile, she looked like she'd been hit by a truck carrying yesterday's news. "Nice place," Ethan said, and he actually seemed to mean it. "Very cozy." "It's a shoebox with delusions of grandeur," Nora replied, accepting the coffee. "What do you want, Mr. Caldwell?" "Ethan, and I want to apologize and explain and possibly grovel." He sat on her small couch, and Nora noticed he looked tired. There were shadows under his blue eyes, and his usually perfect hair was slightly mussed. "I panicked," Ethan began. "My board of directors has been pressuring me to settle down for months. They think a married CEO looks more stable, more trustworthy. Yesterday's press conference was supposed to be about our new AI initiative, but every question was about my love life. So, you decided to randomly marry a stranger? When you put it like that, it sounds insane." "It is insane." Ethan ran a hand through his hair. "I know, but here's the thing. It worked. After our announcement, Caldwell Tech stock jumped 3 points. The board is thrilled. My investors are calling it the best PR move of the decade." Nora set down her coffee cup with a sharp clink. "Oh, I see where this is going. Just hear me out. You want me to pretend to be your wife? Temporarily. Very temporarily. Just until the heat dies down and I can figure out a graceful exit strategy." Nora stared at him. "Are you out of your mind?" "Probably, but I'm also desperate." Ethan leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Look, I've done my research on you. Nora Elizabeth Harper, 28, graduated summa cum laude from Columbia Journalism School. You've been investigating tech companies for 3 years, won 2 press awards, and according to your editor, you're one of the most ethical journalists he's ever worked with. You investigated me? I told you I have resources. The point is, you're perfect for this. You're smart enough to handle the media attention, honest enough that I trust you won't sell me out." And he paused, looking almost vulnerable. "You're the only person who's ever kissed me without wanting something in return. I didn't want to kiss you at all." "Exactly." Ethan's smile was rueful. "Do you know how refreshing that is?" Nora stood up and began pacing her small living room. "This is crazy. I'm a journalist. I investigate people like you for a living. I can't just pretend to be married to a tech mogul." "Why not?" Because I have integrity. Because I have standards. Because my apartment is smaller than your closet. We'll get you a new apartment." "I don't want a new apartment." "Then we'll keep this one." "I don't care where you live, Nora. I care that you're real." Something in his voice made her stop pacing. She turned to look at him. Really look at him. Beneath the expensive suit and perfect features, Ethan Caldwell looked lonely. "What's in it for me?" she asked quietly. Besides saving my entire career and possibly my sanity, Ethan's smile was tentative, exclusive access. "You want to investigate Caldwell Tech? Congratulations. You're married to the CEO. You'll have inside access to everything. Board meetings, financial records, development projects. Think of the stories you could write." Nora felt her journalistic instincts prick up. Caldwell Tech was one of the most secretive companies in Silicon Valley. Getting inside access would be the scoop of a lifetime. And when this temporary marriage ends, clean break, mutual divorce, I'll make sure your career is protected, your reputation intact. You'll have enough exclusive material to write a book if you want. Nora sank back into her chair. "How long are we talking about?" 6 months, maybe less if we play it right. 6 months of pretending to be married to you. 6 months of pretending to be married to each other. Ethan corrected. "I'm not exactly husband material either." Nora looked at him sitting on her second-hand couch, his expensive suit, incongruous against her thrift store pillows. Yesterday, she'd been an unknown tech journalist struggling to pay rent. Today, she was being offered the story of a lifetime by one of the most powerful men in America. "I have conditions," she said finally. Ethan's face lit up with hope. "Name them." "First, I keep my job at Tech Chronicle. I'm not giving up my career for this charade." "Done." "Second, I maintain complete editorial independence. If I find something newsworthy about Caldwell Tech, I report it." Ethan hesitated for just a moment. "Even if it makes me look bad?" "Especially if it makes me look bad." "Okay. Deal." "Third, no one else can know this is fake. Not your assistant, not your board, not even your family." "Agreed. Though you should know my family is complicated." And finally, Nora stood up, extending her hand. "When this is over, we go back to being strangers. No contact, No friendship. No, let's keep in touch. Clean break. Ethan looked at her outstretched hand for a long moment. Then he stood and shook it, his palm warm against hers. Deal, Mrs. Caldwell. It's still Harper for now, Nora corrected. We need to ease into this gradually, or people will get suspicious. Right. Smart. Ethan headed toward the door, then paused. Nora. Yeah. For what it's worth, I'm sorry about dragging you into this mess. Don't apologize yet, Nora replied. Wait until you see what a disaster I am at playing house. As the door closed behind him, Nora slumped against it. What had she just agreed to? 6 months of pretending to be married to Ethan Caldwell. 6 months of living a lie. She looked at her laptop, still playing news coverage of their kiss on repeat. 6 months of being the most famous fake wife in America. What could possibly go wrong? Caldwell Estate, the Hamptons. 2 weeks later, Nora had thought she was prepared for Ethan's family. She was wrong. The Caldwell Estate sprawled across 15 acres of pristine Hamptons real estate, complete with a main house that looked like it had been stolen from a European castle, manicured gardens that belonged in Architectural Digest, and a tennis court where someone was currently playing what sounded like a very aggressive match. Welcome to Caldwell Manor, Ethan said, pulling his Tesla into the circular driveway. Try not to let them intimidate you. A little late for that warning, Nora muttered, staring up at the imposing facade. She'd grown up in a 2-bedroom ranch house in Ohio. This place had more windows than her entire neighborhood. Remember our story, Ethan said as they got out of the car. We met 6 months ago when you were investigating Caldwell Tech for a positive piece. Love at first sight, quick elopement, keeping it quiet for privacy, right? And we're blissfully happy newlyweds who can't keep our hands off each other. Nora's voice dripped sarcasm. That's the spirit. Ethan grinned and grabbed their weekend bags from the trunk. Just follow my lead and try to look smitten. I'll try to contain my overwhelming passion for your tax bracket. Before Ethan could respond, the front door burst open, and a woman who could only be his mother descended upon them like a perfectly coiffed hurricane. Ethan James Caldwell. Margaret Caldwell was in her 60s, with silver hair, designer everything, and the kind of bone structure that suggested good genetics and better plastic surgery. You married this lovely girl and didn't tell your own mother. Hi, Mom. Ethan kissed his mother's cheek while she studied Nora with the intensity of a gemologist examining a suspicious diamond. And you must be Nora, Margaret continued, turning her laser focus to her new daughter-in-law, though I suppose it's Nora Caldwell now. Actually, I'm keeping Harper professionally, Nora said, extending her hand. It's wonderful to meet you, Mrs. Caldwell. Margaret, please. We're family now. Margaret ignored Nora's hand and pulled her into a hug that smelled like Chanel. No, 5 and barely contained disapproval, though I must say, I'm surprised Ethan chose someone so normal. Mom, Ethan warned. It's a compliment, darling. Normal is refreshing after that awful Lauren Mitchell phase. Who's Lauren Mitchell? Nora asked. No one important, Ethan said quickly. His ex-fiancée, Margaret supplied helpfully. Heir to the Mitchell Hotel fortune. Lovely girl. Perfect breeding. But absolutely no substance. You're much more interesting, I'm sure. Nora glanced at Ethan, who looked like he wanted to disappear into the manicured hedges. Ex-fiancée? That was definitely not in his biography. Is that the famous sister-in-law? The voice came from the tennis court, where a tall woman with Ethan's blue eyes and a wicked grin was approaching, still carrying her racket. Nora, meet my sister, Emily, Ethan said. Nora. Emily Caldwell Watson was everything Nora had expected from Ethan's sister. Tall, athletic, casually elegant in tennis whites that probably cost more than Nora's monthly salary, but her smile was genuine, and her handshake firm. So, you're the one who finally tamed my brother? Emily said, looking between them with obvious curiosity. I have to admit, when I saw the news coverage, I thought it was another one of Ethan's PR stunts. Emily. Ethan's voice held a warning. What? It's not like you haven't fake dated before. Remember the actress from that superhero movie? What was her name? Sarah something? Nora felt her fake wife smile slipping. You fake dated before? That was different, Ethan said quickly. That was just for a premiere. This is real. Of course it is, Emily said, but her eyes were dancing with mischief. Real enough that you eloped without telling anyone. Real enough that Mom found out from page 6 instead of her son. We wanted privacy, Nora said, surprising herself by jumping to Ethan's defense. With his profile, everything becomes a circus. Smart girl, Margaret said approvingly, though I still think you could have managed a small ceremony. The Caldwells have a reputation to maintain. Speaking of reputation, came another voice from the house. Some of us have been waiting for introductions. Nora turned to see an older man approaching with the kind of commanding presence that made it clear where Ethan got his natural authority. James Caldwell was in his 70s, but carried himself like a man 20 years younger, his silver hair perfectly styled, and his gray eyes sharp with intelligence. "Dad," Ethan said, and Nora caught the slight tension in his voice. "Nora, this is my father, James Caldwell." "Mr. Caldwell." Nora extended her hand, which James shook with the precise pressure of a man who'd spent decades reading people through handshakes. "Welcome to the family, Nora. I hope you know what you've gotten yourself into." "I'm beginning to get an idea," Nora replied honestly. James chuckled. "I like her already. She's honest, unlike some people we could mention," Emily muttered, earning a sharp look from her mother. "Well?" Margaret said brightly, clearly trying to steer the conversation back to safer waters. "Let's get you settled in. I've put you in Ethan's old room. I hope you don't mind sharing. I know you young couples today sometimes prefer separate spaces, but traditions are important in this family." Nora felt her face heat up. Sharing a room with Ethan hadn't been part of their arrangement. That's fine. Wonderful. Ethan, why don't you show Nora upstairs while I finish preparing lunch? We're eating on the terrace at 1. As they climbed the sweeping staircase, Nora tried not to gawk at the oil paintings, crystal chandeliers, and general opulence surrounding her. "Your family seems," she began, "intense, overwhelming, completely insane." I was going to say close, but those work too. Ethan opened the door to what had apparently been his childhood bedroom, though it looked more like a luxury hotel suite. A king-size bed dominated the space, flanked by French doors that opened onto a balcony overlooking the gardens. "One bed," Nora observed. "I can sleep on the couch," Ethan said quickly. "Or the floor. I don't snore." "How do you know you don't snore?" "Good point. I've never had anyone around long enough to complain." Nora set her overnight bag on the chair by the window. "Your sister seems suspicious." "Emily's always suspicious. It's her default setting." "And your ex-fiancé?" Ethan sank onto the edge of the bed, suddenly looking tired. "Ancient history. We broke up 2 years ago. You were engaged and didn't think to mention it? It wasn't relevant." "Ethan, I'm supposed to be your wife. Don't you think your fake wife should know about your real ex-fiancé?" "Fair point." Ethan ran a hand through his hair. "Lauren and I were together for 3 years. Our families had been friends forever. Everyone expected us to get married, so we got engaged. But it wasn't real. It was just what was expected." "What happened?" "I realized I didn't want to spend my life with someone I was marrying because it looked good on paper. I wanted," he paused, looking out at the gardens. "I wanted what my parents have, actually. They still hold hands at dinner after 40 years of marriage." Nora felt something shift in her chest, a dangerous flutter of sympathy. "That's sweet." "Yeah, well, don't let it fool you. They can also argue about flower arrangements for 3 hours straight." A knock on the door interrupted them. "Kids," Margaret's voice called. "Lunch is ready. Coming, Mom." Ethan called back. He stood and offered Nora his arm. "Ready to face the Caldwell family interrogation?" Nora looked at his extended arm, then at the beautiful, complicated man offering it. 3 weeks ago, she'd been a nobody journalist writing about tech startups. Now she was about to have lunch with one of America's wealthiest families, pretending to be married to their son. "Ready as I'll ever be," she said, taking his arm. As they walked back downstairs, Nora couldn't shake the feeling that she was crossing a line she couldn't uncross. The fake marriage had started as a business arrangement, but spending time with Ethan's family, seeing him in his element, watching him deflect his mother's criticism and joke with his sister, it was becoming harder to remember that none of this was real, and that was the most dangerous thing of all. Manhattan, Caldwell Tech headquarters. 3 weeks later, Nora had always prided herself on being a good liar when the story demanded it. She'd posed as everything from a potential investor to a disgruntled employee to get the scoops that built her career, but pretending to be Ethan Caldwell's wife was proving to be the most challenging performance of her life, and not for the reasons she'd expected. The problem wasn't the media attention, though that had been intense. It wasn't the fancy events where she had to smile and nod. While socialites discussed charity galas that cost more than most people's annual salaries, it wasn't even sharing Ethan's penthouse apartment, which they'd moved into the week after the Hamptons' visit to maintain appearances. The problem was Ethan himself. 3 weeks of living together had revealed layers to Ethan Caldwell that the business magazines never covered, like how he made coffee every morning at exactly 6:15 a.m. and always made enough for two, even though Nora never asked. How he worked late into the night but always kept the volume down so she could sleep. How he'd converted his home office's sitting area into a makeshift workspace for her, complete with the specific brand of pens she preferred and a mini fridge stocked with her favorite sparkling water. Small gestures, thoughtful gestures, the kind of gestures that made it dangerously easy to forget their marriage, was just an elaborate piece of theater. Nora was discovering that fake married life with Ethan Caldwell was alarmingly comfortable, tout confortable. She was thinking about this as she sat in Caldwell Tech's gleaming conference room, ostensibly there as Ethan's wife, but actually working on the story that was going to change everything. Her laptop was open to what appeared to be wedding planning websites, but hidden behind the browser was a folder containing 3 weeks' worth of investigative notes. Caldwell Tech wasn't just developing artificial intelligence for consumer applications. They were working on government contracts, military applications, and some of those contracts raised serious ethical questions about privacy, surveillance, and the potential for abuse. It was exactly the kind of story that had made her career. It was also exactly the kind of story that would destroy Ethan's Mrs. Caldwell. Nora looked up to find Rachel Lee, Ethan's assistant, standing in the doorway with a tablet and an expression of barely concealed panic. "Yes? I'm so sorry to interrupt, but we have a situation. There's a woman in the lobby claiming to be Mr. Caldwell's real wife." Nora's blood turned to ice water. "Excuse me? She says her name is Lauren Mitchell, and she's demanding to speak with Mr. Caldwell immediately. Security is holding her, but she's threatening to call the press." Of course, it was the ex-fiancé, because Nora's life wasn't complicated enough already. "Where is Ethan?" "In the server room with the development team. Should I?" "No. Don't interrupt him. I'll handle this." Nora closed her laptop and stood, her mind racing. This was either a publicity stunt, a mental breakdown, or something far more dangerous to their carefully constructed charade. The elevator ride to the lobby felt like a descent into purgatory. Nora had Googled Lauren Mitchell after the Hamptons' visit, so she knew what to expect. Tall, blonde, stunning in that effortless way that came from good genes and better personal trainers. But seeing her in person was still a shock. Lauren Mitchell looked like she'd stepped off the cover of Vogue. She was pacing in front of the security desk, her designer heels clicking against the marble floor, her perfectly styled hair catching the light from the floor-to-ceiling windows. She looked exactly like the kind of woman who should be married to Ethan Caldwell. Unlike Nora, who was wearing jeans, sneakers, and a blazer she'd owned since college. "Miss Mitchell," Nora approached with what she hoped was confident calm. "I'm Nora Harper Caldwell. I understand you wanted to speak with my husband." Lauren turned, and Nora found herself looking into green eyes that were equal parts beautiful and furious. "Your husband?" Lauren's laugh was sharp as broken glass. "Honey, I hate to break it to you, but Ethan and I never actually broke up." The lobby seemed to tilt slightly. "I'm sorry, what?" "Oh, this is Rich. He didn't tell you, did he?" Lauren stepped closer, and Nora caught a whiff of expensive perfume and barely contained rage. "Ethan and I had a fight 2 years ago. A big one. I said some things, he said some things, and I left. But we never actually broke up. Legally, we're still engaged." "That's impossible." "Oh, is it? When was the last time you saw our breakup announcement in the press? When did we ever publicly end things?" Lauren's smile was all teeth and no warmth. "Ethan is very good at managing his public image, but he's terrible at difficult conversations. He just let everyone assume we were over." Nora felt like she was drowning in designer perfume and existential crisis. Even if that were true, and I'm not saying it is, it doesn't matter. Ethan and I are married. Are you, though?" The question hung in the air between them like a sword. Because, of course, Lauren would be the type to do her homework. Of course, she'd dig into the details of Ethan's sudden marriage announcement. "I've had investigators looking into your little love story. Lauren continued conversationally. Funny thing about elopements, they usually leave a paper trail. Marriage licenses, witnesses, officiants. But yours, it's like it never happened. Nora's mouth went dry. They'd been so focused on the public performance that they'd never actually created the legal framework for their fake marriage. There was no marriage license because there had been no marriage. What do you want? Nora asked quietly. What I've always wanted, Ethan, and I'm prepared to offer you a very generous settlement to step aside quietly. You want to buy me off? I want to correct a mistake. Lauren opened her Hermes bag and pulled out a check, already written, $5 million cash. All you have to do is disappear. Nora stared at the check. $5 million. Enough to pay off her student loans. Buy a house. Never worry about money again. All she had to do was walk away from a fake marriage that was becoming more complicated by the day. Think about it, Lauren said, pressing the check into Nora's hand. You seem like a smart girl. You know this isn't real. You know you don't belong in his world. Why not take the money and get out before you get hurt? Nora. Both women turned to see Ethan stepping out of the elevator, his expression shifting from confusion to something darker as he took in the scene. Ethan, Lauren's entire demeanor changed, her voice dropping to a sultry purr. Darling, we need to talk. Lauren. Ethan's voice was carefully neutral. But Nora caught the tension in his shoulders. What are you doing here? Fixing things like I should have done 2 years ago. Lauren moved toward him with predatory grace. We need to discuss our situation. Our real situation. Ethan looked between Lauren and Nora, his gaze settling on the check in Nora's hand. Something flickered across his face. Hurt? Disappointment? Nora couldn't tell. Maybe we should take this somewhere private, he said finally. Excellent idea. Lauren smiled triumphantly. Your office? Actually, Nora said, surprising herself. I think I should be part of this conversation since it involves my husband. She looked directly at Ethan as she said it, putting emphasis on the word husband. Whatever was happening here, whatever Lauren thought she knew, Nora wasn't backing down. Not yet. Ethan studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. Of course. My office. The elevator ride to the executive floor was silent, except for the soft jazz playing through the speakers and the sound of Lauren's nails tapping against her phone screen. Nora stood between the two of them, hyper-aware of the tension crackling in the small space. Ethan's office was everything Nora had expected. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan, sleek modern furniture, and a desk that probably cost more than her car. But she'd been there before, had even worked at the small conference table in the corner while Ethan took calls. It felt like home, which was dangerous. So, Ethan said, settling behind his desk with practiced authority, Lauren, explain. Oh, Ethan, always so formal. Lauren perched on the edge of his desk in a move that was clearly calculated to be both casual and intimate. We never actually broke up, darling. We had a fight, and I left in a huff. But we never had the conversation. We never ended things properly. We've been broken up for 2 years, Ethan said flatly. Have we? Did you ever actually say the words? Did we ever have the "this is over" conversation? Lauren's smile was sharp. Because I remember you following me to the door, telling me we'd talk when I calmed down. But we never did talk, did we? Nora watched Ethan's face carefully. There was something there, some flicker of uncertainty that made her stomach drop. That's semantics, Lauren. Is it? Because legally, we're still engaged. I still have the ring. She held up her left hand, where a diamond, the size of a small planet, caught the light. I never returned it. I never called off the engagement. You never asked for it back because I assumed. You assumed. Lauren's gaze swept over Nora dismissively. Just like you assumed I'd be fine with being replaced by. Hey, Nora said sharply. I'm sitting right here. Of course you are. Lauren's smile didn't reach her eyes. Tell me, Nora, what do you really know about your husband? Do you know about his panic attacks, his insomnia, the way he works 18-hour days because he's terrified of failing? Do you know that he checks his phone every morning at exactly 7:23 because that's when the markets open in London? Nora felt each word like a physical blow because she did know those things. She'd noticed Ethan's late-night pacing, had seen him working at 3 a.m., had watched him check market reports with the obsessive precision Lauren described. Do you know, Lauren continued, That he proposed to me on the first anniversary of his father's heart attack because he was afraid of losing people he cared about. Lauren, stop. Ethan's voice was quiet but sharp. Why? Because you haven't told your wife these things? Because after all this time together, she doesn't really know you at all. The silence that followed was deafening. Nora looked at Ethan, who was staring out the window, his jaw clenched tight. I think, Nora said carefully, that I should let you two talk privately. Nora. Ethan started. No, it's fine. This is between you and your ex-fiancé. She stood, still clutching Lauren's check. I'll be at home when you're ready to discuss this properly. As she walked toward the door, Nora heard Lauren's triumphant laugh behind her. Smart girl, Lauren said. She knows when she's outmatched. Nora paused at the door, her hand on the handle. She could walk away, take the money, disappear. Let Ethan sort out his complicated past with his complicated ex-fiancée. It would be the smart thing to do. Instead, she turned back. For the record, she said, looking directly at Lauren, I know that Ethan takes his coffee black, except on Sundays when he adds exactly 1 sugar cube. I know he keeps a picture of his sister's kids on his desk, even though he pretends he's not sentimental. I know he donated $10 million anonymously to literacy programs last year and thinks no one knows about it. And I know that he checks his phone at 7:23 every morning because he's still worried about his father's health, not because of the London markets. Lauren's smile faltered slightly. I also know, Laura continued, that real love isn't about knowing someone's schedule or their fears. It's about what you do with that knowledge. And from where I'm standing, it looks like you used his vulnerabilities to manipulate him, while I've spent the last month trying to protect them. At that, she looked at Ethan, who was staring at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. When you're done here, she said quietly, we need to talk. Really talk about all of this. Nora left the office with her heart pounding and Lauren's check still crumpled in her hand. She had just defended a fake marriage with real emotion, and she wasn't entirely sure what that meant, but she was about to find out because one way or another, the careful facade they'd built was about to come crashing down. And Nora had the uncomfortable feeling that when the dust settled, someone was going to get hurt. She just hoped it wouldn't be her. Caldwell Penthouse and various Manhattan locations. Same day, Nora spent the rest of the afternoon walking. Not the purposeful stride of a woman with somewhere to be, but the restless wandering of someone trying to outpace her own thoughts. She walked from Caldwell Tech's gleaming headquarters in Midtown all the way down to the Village, then back up through Central Park, her mind churning with everything that had happened in Ethan's office. Lauren's check was still in her jacket pocket, growing more wrinkled with each passing hour. $5 million. More money than Nora had ever imagined having, enough to disappear, start over somewhere else, maybe write the novel she'd been putting off for years. But every time she considered it seriously, she thought about Ethan's face when Lauren had started listing his vulnerabilities like weapons in an arsenal, the way his shoulders had tensed when his ex-fiancée had weaponized his father's heart attack, turned his proposal into something calculated rather than romantic. Nora had defended him instinctively, passionately, without thinking about the consequences. She had defended a fake marriage with real emotion, and that terrified her more than any amount of money Lauren could offer. By the time she finally returned to Ethan's penthouse, their penthouse, she corrected herself. Though the possessive pronoun felt dangerous, the sun was setting over Manhattan, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. The apartment was dark except for the soft glow of city lights filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Ethan, she called, but got no response. Nora found him exactly where she'd expected, in his home office, hunched over his laptop with 3 empty coffee cups arranged around his workspace like protective talismans. His tie was loosened, his sleeves rolled up, and his dark hair looked like he'd been running his hands through it for hours. You missed dinner, she said softly from the doorway. He looked up, and Nora was struck by how exhausted he appeared. Not just tired, exhausted in a way that went deeper than missed sleep. I wasn't sure you were coming back, he admitted. I wasn't sure either. Nora stepped into the office, noting the scattered papers on his desk, the multiple browser windows open on his computer screen. What are you working on? Damage control. Lauren's lawyers contacted mine an hour after you left. They're threatening to go public with her version of events if I don't meet with her privately. Nora sank into the chair across from his desk, the one where she'd spent countless mornings working on her own articles while he took conference calls. What's her version of events? Ethan leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. That our engagement never officially ended. That my marriage to you is invalid because I was still contractually committed to her. That she's willing to forgive my indiscretion if I come back to her. Oh, and legally, does she have a case? My lawyers are looking into it. The engagement contract her family insisted on was comprehensive. Old-fashioned in ways I didn't fully understand at the time. Ethan's smile was bitter. Apparently, the Mitchell family takes their business arrangements seriously. Business arrangements. That's what most society marriages are, Nora. Mergers disguised as romance. The combination of family wealth, social connections, shared business interests. Love is a nice bonus, but it's not really the point. Nora felt something cold settle in her stomach. Is that what you thought this was? A business arrangement? Ethan was quiet for a long moment. His gaze fixed on something beyond her shoulder. In the beginning, yes, that's exactly what I thought this was. And now? The question hung between them like a bridge. Neither was sure they wanted to cross. Ethan looked at her then, really looked at her, and Nora saw something in his blue eyes that made her breath catch. Now I'm not sure what this is, he said quietly, but I know it's not what I planned. Before Nora could respond, Ethan's phone buzzed against his desk. He glanced at the screen and frowned. It's Emily. She wants to know if I've seen the evening news. That doesn't sound good. Ethan was already reaching for the remote, turning on the wall-mounted television behind his desk. The local news was just coming back from commercial, and Nora's heart sank as she saw the familiar Entertainment Tonight logo in the corner of the screen. Explosive allegations from socialite Lauren Mitchell, who claims that tech mogul Ethan Caldwell's recent marriage is nothing more than an elaborate publicity stunt. The screen cut to footage of Lauren standing outside Caldwell Tech, looking perfectly composed and devastatingly beautiful as she spoke to a cluster of reporters. Ethan and I never broke up, Lauren was saying, her voice carrying just the right note of wounded dignity. We had a lover's quarrel 2 years ago, but we're still legally engaged. This marriage to Nora Harper appears to be nothing more than a desperate attempt to boost Caldwell Tech stock prices through manufactured personal drama. Oh no, Nora whispered. The reporter's voice continued over B-roll footage of Nora and Ethan's kiss at the Plaza Hotel. Mitchell provided documents to this station that appear to show an engagement contract between the Caldwell and Mitchell families signed 3 years ago and, according to legal experts, still binding. The camera cut back to Lauren. I love Ethan, and I understand why he felt he needed to do this. Caldwell Tech has been struggling with investor confidence, and a stable family image can be worth billions in market value. But enough is enough. It's time for him to stop this charade and come home. Ethan muted the television, but the damage was done. Nora could already imagine her phone exploding with calls from reporters, her editor, everyone who'd been following their story. She's smart, Nora said, surprising herself with how calm her voice sounded. She's not attacking you directly. She's positioning herself as the understanding ex-fiancé who just wants her man back. And she's making our marriage look like a corporate conspiracy. Nora, no, she's right about one thing. Caldwell Tech stock did jump after our announcement, and we both know this marriage isn't real. Nora stood up, pacing to the window. Maybe we should just end this now before it gets worse. Is that what you want? Nora turned to find Ethan watching her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. What I want doesn't matter. This is about protecting your company, your reputation. That's not what I asked. I asked what you want. Ethan stood and walked around his desk, stopping just close enough that Nora could smell his cologne, could see the flecks of silver in his blue eyes. I want. Nora started, then stopped. What did she want? 3 weeks ago, the answer would have been simple. The story, the exclusive access, the career boost that came with being connected to Ethan Caldwell. Now she wanted things that scared her. She wanted their morning coffee routine to be real. She wanted the gentle way he said, "Good night" to be genuine. She wanted the careful distance they maintained in their shared living space to disappear entirely. She wanted him to kiss her again. And this time, she wanted it to mean something. I want this to be real, she whispered. The admission torn from her like a confession. Ethan went very still. Nora, I know how that sounds. I know how ridiculous it is. We've known each other for 3 weeks. This whole thing started as a lie. Nora laughed, but it came out shaky. But somewhere between your mother's interrogation and sharing a bathroom and watching you work at 3:00 the morning because you care so much about your employees that you can't sleep, I stopped pretending. So did I, Ethan said quietly. They stared at each other across the space of his office, the admission hanging between them like a dare. Outside, Manhattan glittered in the darkness, 8 million people living their lives. But Nora felt like she and Ethan were the only two people in the world. This is insane, she said. Completely insane, Ethan agreed. We barely know each other. I know you take your coffee with exactly 2 sugars and a splash of almond milk. I know you bite your pen when you're thinking. I know you talk to yourself when you're writing, and you always apologize to the furniture when you bump into it. That's not the same as knowing someone, is it? Ethan stepped closer. I know you donated your first journalism award to a literacy program instead of keeping it on your shelf. I know you call your mom every Sunday, even though she spends the entire conversation asking when you're going to get a real job. I know you stayed up all night researching my father's heart condition so you'd know what questions not to ask at dinner. Nora's eyes widened. How did you? I know because I've been watching you, Nora. Really watching you. And what I see is someone who cares about people, who fights for the truth even when it's inconvenient, who defended a fake marriage like it was real because you couldn't stand to see someone you care about being manipulated. Ethan, I'm falling in love with you, he said, the words coming out in a rush. I know that's not part of our agreement. I know this is supposed to be temporary and professional and clean, but I can't help it. I'm falling in love with my fake wife, and I have no idea what to do about it. Nora felt her heart stop, then start again at double speed. You're falling in love with me? Terrifyingly, completely, inappropriately in love with you. Oh, Nora sank back into her chair, overwhelmed. Oh, I know this complicates everything, Ethan continued, running his hand through his hair. I know you probably think this is just the stress of the situation, or proximity, or I'm falling in love with you too. Nora interrupted. Ethan stopped mid-sentence. You are? I'm falling in love with the way you make coffee for 2 every morning, even though I never asked. I'm falling in love with how you light up when you talk about the literacy program Caldwell Tech sponsors. I'm falling in love with the way you put your hand on my back when we're walking through crowds, like you're protecting me without even thinking about it. They stared at each other, both breathing hard, both looking slightly stunned by their own confessions. So, what do we do now? Nora asked. I have no idea, Ethan admitted, but I know what I don't want to do. I don't want to let Lauren win. I don't want to go back to a life where marriage is a business transaction and love is a liability. And even if it means fighting her publicly, even if it means more media scrutiny, more questions about our relationship, especially then, Ethan moved around his desk and knelt beside Nora's chair, taking her hands in his. Nora, I know we started this as a lie, but what if we didn't have to keep lying? What if we made it real? Made it real? How? Marry me. Really, marry me. Not for the cameras or the stock prices or the board of directors. Marry me because you want to see what happens when we stop pretending. Nora looked down at their joined hands, her heart hammering against her ribs. Ethan. That's crazy. We've known each other 3 weeks. My grandparents got engaged after knowing each other for 2 weeks. They were married for 60 years. That was different. That was real. And so is this, Nora. What we have right now, in this moment, this is real. Nora thought about Lauren's check, still crumpled in her jacket pocket. She thought about the safe choice, the smart choice, the choice that wouldn't leave her heart exposed and vulnerable. Then she thought about Ethan making her coffee every morning, about the way he'd looked when she defended him to Lauren, about the way he said her name like it meant something. Okay, she whispered. Okay, let's make it real. Nora squeezed his hands. Let's get really married and see what happens. Ethan's smile was brilliant, transformative, like the sun coming out after a storm. Really? Really? But first, we need to deal with Lauren and her lawyers and the media circus that's probably camping outside our building right now, right? The practical stuff. Ethan stood, but he didn't let go of her hands. Nora. Yeah, when this is all over, when we've dealt with Lauren and the lawyers and the press, remind me to propose to you properly with a ring and everything. Nora laughed, feeling lighter than she had in weeks. I'll hold you to that. Good, because I have big plans for our real wedding. Oh, really? Like what? Well, for starters, I'm inviting more than just the hotel security guard as our witness. Nora was still laughing when Ethan's phone rang. cutting through their moment like a blade. He glanced at the screen, and his expression grew serious. "It's my lawyer," he said. "This is it, Nora. Once I answer this call, we're all in. Are you sure?" Nora looked at Ethan, really looked at him, at his rumpled shirt and worried eyes, and the way he was still holding her hand like an anchor. 3 weeks ago, she'd been a struggling journalist with student loans and a studio apartment and dreams that felt perpetually out of reach. Now she was about to fight for a love that had started as a lie but had somehow become the most real thing in her life. "I'm sure," she said. "Let's do this." Ethan answered the phone, and Nora knew there was no going back. The war for their future was about to begin. Manhattan. 2 weeks later, the war room was appropriately named. Ethan's largest conference room at Caldwell Tech had been transformed into a command center for what the media was calling the most dramatic love triangle of the decade. Lawyers' files covered every surface. Multiple televisions played news coverage on mute, and Nora's laptop was surrounded by enough legal documents to stock a small law library. Nora had never imagined that fighting for love would involve so much paperwork. "The good news," said Elizabeth Winters, Ethan's lead attorney, "is that Lauren's engagement contract has some significant loopholes. The bad news is that she's hired Harrison Kent and Associates," which means Nora asked, though Ethan's expression already told her it wasn't good. "They're the firm that specializes in high-profile character assassination," Elizabeth replied grimly. "They've been feeding stories to the tabloids for the past week. Everything from questioning your financial motives to suggesting that Caldwell Tech's recent AI developments are somehow connected to your journalism background." Nora looked at the latest stack of tabloid covers spread across the table. "Gold digger or corporate spy," screamed one headline, accompanied by an unflattering photo of her leaving a coffee shop. Another featured a split image of her and Lauren with the caption "Tech mogul's wife war, real love or fake marriage." "They're trying to make me look like either a fortune hunter or a corporate infiltrator," Nora observed. "Both, actually," Elizabeth said. "It's a clever strategy. They're covering all possible motivations for why you might fake a marriage to Ethan while positioning Lauren as the wronged woman fighting for true love." Ethan, who had been uncharacteristically quiet during the morning briefing, finally spoke up. "What about our counter-argument?" "That's where things get complicated." Elizabeth opened another file. "To prove your marriage is real, we need to demonstrate genuine emotional connection, shared life goals, integrated finances, and future planning. The problem is, most of your relationship has been lived in public, which makes it look performative. But we do have all those things now," Nora protested. "We've been living together, sharing expenses, making plans." "For 2 weeks," Elizabeth interrupted gently. "Lauren and Ethan were together for 3 years. They have shared property, joint investments, a documented relationship history that goes back to childhood family connections." Nora felt a familiar knot of anxiety tighten in her stomach. "So, you're saying we can't win?" "I'm saying we need to be smart about how we fight this." Elizabeth pulled out another document. "Lauren's team made a mistake yesterday. They filed a motion claiming that Ethan's mental state was compromised when he announced your marriage, suggesting he was suffering from stress-induced decision-making problems." "That's ridiculous," Ethan said sharply. "It's also potentially defamatory." Elizabeth continued with the first smile Nora had seen from her all week. "They're essentially arguing that Ethan Caldwell, CEO of a multi-billion-dollar corporation, is mentally incompetent. That opens them up to some serious legal challenges, especially if we can prove that Ethan's decision-making has been consistently sound throughout your relationship." Nora looked at Ethan, who was staring out the window at the Manhattan skyline. She could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw was clenched tight. The past 2 weeks had been a whirlwind of legal meetings, media statements, and careful public appearances designed to prove their relationship was genuine. The irony wasn't lost on her that now that their feelings were real, they were having to work harder than ever to prove they weren't faking. "What do you need from us?" Nora asked. "More evidence of genuine partnership, joint bank accounts, shared living arrangements that go beyond basic cohabitation, witnesses who can testify to observing authentic emotional connection." Elizabeth paused. "And Nora, I need to ask, are you prepared for them to dig into every aspect of your life? Your family, your finances, your past relationships? Because that's what's coming." Nora thought about her parents in Ohio, her modest upbringing, her student loans and second-hand furniture, and the dozens of small ways she didn't fit into Ethan's world. Then she thought about Ethan making her coffee every morning, about the way he listened when she talked about her work, about how he'd started keeping her favorite yogurt in the fridge without being asked. "I'm prepared," she said. "Good, because we have a status hearing tomorrow morning, and Lauren's team is going to do everything they can to make you look like a fraud." After Elizabeth left, Nora and Ethan sat in the empty conference room, surrounded by the detritus of their legal battle. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, casting long shadows across the scattered papers. "Second thoughts?" Ethan asked quietly. "About which part? The fake marriage, the real marriage, or the very public legal battle for the right to love you? Any of it? All of it?" Ethan turned to face her. "Nora, when I asked you to make this real, I didn't know it would turn into this circus. I didn't know they'd try to destroy your reputation to save mine." Nora reached across the table and took his hand. "Ethan, look at me." He did, his blue eyes troubled. "I knew what I was signing up for," she said. "Maybe not the specific details, but I knew that choosing you meant choosing this world. The media attention, the legal complications, the people who are going to question my motives for the rest of my life. And you're okay with that?" "I'm terrified of it," Nora admitted, "but I'm more terrified of the alternative. I'm more terrified of walking away and spending the rest of my life wondering what would have happened if I'd been brave enough to fight for this." Ethan brought her hand to his lips, pressing a soft kiss to her knuckles. "I love you," he said simply. "I love you, too. Which is why I need to tell you something." Ethan went still. "What?" Nora reached into her bag and pulled out a thick folder. "I've been working on an investigative piece about Caldwell Tech's government contracts, the AI applications, the military connections, some of the ethical questions around privacy and surveillance." Ethan stared at the folder like it might explode. "Nora, I started it before we got involved. It was going to be my way out of this arrangement, the story that would make my career, even if our fake marriage fell apart." Nora slid the folder across the table. "But I can't publish it now, not because I'm trying to hide anything, but because I can't be objective about you anymore. My feelings compromise my ability to report the story fairly." Ethan opened the folder, scanning the first few pages. Nora watched his expression change as he read her notes, saw her months of investigation, her careful documentation of contracts and connections that most people would never see. "This is thorough," he said finally. "It's also potentially damaging to Caldwell Tech, depending on how I chose to frame it. And you're just giving it up?" "I'm giving it to you," Nora corrected. "Because I trust you to do the right thing with the information, and because I'd rather be your wife than your investigator." Ethan closed the folder and looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You realize this proves Lauren's point, don't you? That you had ulterior motives for getting close to me." Nora felt her heart sink. "Ethan, which is why we're never going to mention this to anyone." He continued firmly, "Because what matters isn't why you started investigating Caldwell Tech. What matters is that you're willing to give up a career-making story because you love me more than you love the scoop. Are you sure? Because if this comes out during the hearing, it won't come out because I'm going to lock this in my personal safe. And the only people who will ever see it are the compliance officers I'm going to ask to review our practices." Ethan stood and walked around the table, pulling Nora up and into his arms. "Do you know what you just did? Committed professional suicide? You just proved that our relationship is real in a way that no legal document ever could. You chose love over ambition, trust over skepticism. You chose us." Nora leaned into his embrace, breathing in the familiar scent of his cologne, mixed with the coffee they'd been drinking all day. "So, what happens now?" "Now we go home. Order takeout from that Thai place you like. And practice being a boring married couple who argues about whose turn it is to do the dishes. That sounds perfect. And tomorrow we go to court and fight for the right to keep being boring together." But first, they had to survive the media gauntlet waiting outside Caldwell Tech's building. Nora could see the reporters through the window, their cameras ready, their questions prepared. Someone had leaked that today was a crucial strategy meeting, and they were hungry for any hint about how the case was going. "Ready?" Ethan asked, offering her his arm. "Ready." They rode the elevator down in comfortable silence, their hands intertwined. Nora thought about the conversation they'd had in this same elevator 3 weeks ago, when they were still pretending their marriage was real. Now they were about to walk out into a crowd of reporters and defend a love that had grown from the most unlikely circumstances. The lobby doors opened, and immediately they were hit with a wall of sound, shouting reporters, clicking cameras, questions hurled like weapons. Nora, are you doing this for the money? Ethan, is it true you're mentally incompetent? When did the fake marriage become real? Are you prepared to lose everything for love? Nora felt Ethan's arm tighten around her waist, steadying her against the chaos. They had practiced this, had planned their route to the car, their brief statement to the press, but as they pushed through the crowd, Nora found herself thinking about that last question. Are you prepared to lose everything for love? She looked up at Ethan, at his determined profile as he navigated them through the sea of reporters. She thought about everything she was risking. Her career, her privacy, her comfortable anonymity. Everything she might lose if this went badly. Then she thought about everything she'd already gained, not just Ethan, but the version of herself that had emerged over the past month. The woman who had defended her fake husband with real passion, who had stood up to Lauren Mitchell, who had chosen love over ambition even when it meant professional sacrifice. They reached the car, and Ethan opened the door for her, shielding her from the cameras with his body. As she slid into the back seat, one reporter managed to push closer than the others. Nora, one question. What do you say to people who think this is all just an elaborate publicity stunt? Nora paused, one foot in the car, one foot on the sidewalk. Ethan was looking at her, clearly ready to deflect the question, to get them both safely away from the chaos. Instead, Nora turned to face the reporter. I say that real love doesn't follow a script, she said clearly, her voice carrying over the noise of the crowd. I say that sometimes the best things in life start as accidents and become choices. And I say that anyone who thinks you can fake the way Ethan Caldwell looks at me has never been truly loved. The crowd went silent for a moment, cameras still clicking. But the shouted questions stopped. Nora looked directly into the nearest camera. Tomorrow we're going to court to fight for our marriage. Not because we have to prove anything to anyone, but because what we have is worth fighting for. And if that's not real love, then I don't know what is. She slid into the car, Ethan following close behind, and they pulled away from the curb as the reporters exploded back into motion. That was either brilliant or completely insane, Ethan said, taking her hand. Probably both. Definitely both. Ethan squeezed her fingers. I can't believe you just gave them that soundbite. They wanted to know if it was real, Nora said simply. So, I told them. The next morning, Nora's impromptu statement was playing on every news channel in the city. Real love doesn't follow a script had already become a hashtag trending on social media. The video of her speaking to the cameras with Ethan standing protectively beside her had been viewed millions of times. More importantly, it had shifted the narrative. Instead of focusing on whether their marriage was fake, people were talking about whether love could grow from unusual circumstances. Instead of questioning Nora's motives, they were debating whether modern romance could start as business and become personal. The public response was unprecedented. Social media was flooded with stories from couples who had met in unconventional ways through work arrangements, fake dating situations, or elaborate schemes that had somehow become real love. Real love. No script became a movement, with people sharing their own stories of relationships that didn't follow traditional patterns. Nora found herself reading comment after comment from women who said her words had resonated with them. Finally, someone who admits that love is messy and complicated and doesn't always look like the movies, wrote one. Another said, "Thank you for showing that it's okay to fall in love with someone in a weird way and still have it be real." Even more surprisingly, Caldwell tech stock had stabilized. Investors seemed to be responding positively to what they saw as authentic emotional investment from their CEO. Market analysts were calling it the authenticity premium, the value that came from genuine human connection in an increasingly artificial business world. You've turned this into a love story, Elizabeth observed as they prepared for the hearing. That's either going to work brilliantly or backfire spectacularly. But there was something else Nora hadn't expected. The way her fellow journalists were covering the story. Instead of treating it as just another celebrity scandal, many were writing thoughtful pieces about the intersection of personal and professional life, about the challenges of maintaining journalistic integrity while navigating complex relationships. Her former colleague at Tech Chronicle, Michael Rivera, had written a particularly insightful piece about the ethical questions Nora's situation raised for journalists. Nora Harper has done something that most of us in this business fear, he wrote. She's allowed her personal life to intersect with her professional responsibilities, and instead of compromising her integrity, she's somehow enhanced it. Her transparency about her conflicts of interest, her willingness to step back from stories when necessary, and her commitment to truth over convenience make her a model for how modern journalists can navigate complex relationships without sacrificing their principles. The piece had been reprinted in journalism schools across the country and was being used as a case study in ethics classes. Nora found herself simultaneously proud and terrified of becoming an accidental poster child for journalistic integrity in the digital age. The courthouse was surrounded by protesters. Some held signs supporting real love. Others demanded justice for Lauren. But there was a third group that surprised Nora, young women holding signs that read, "Integrity over everything and real journalists tell hard truths." Apparently, her story had resonated beyond just the romance angle. Nora tried not to look at any of the groups as they made their way through the crowd and into the building, but she caught sight of one sign that made her pause. "Love doesn't have to be perfect to be real." The young woman holding it smiled and gave Nora a thumbs up. Inside the courthouse, the atmosphere was tense but electric. The gallery was packed with reporters, Caldwell Tech employees, members of both families, and what appeared to be a significant number of people who had simply followed the story and wanted to see how it ended. Nora spotted her parents in the third row. They had flown in from Ohio the night before, despite her protests that they didn't need to come. Her mother had insisted, saying, "My daughter is fighting for love in front of half the country. I'm not missing that." Seeing them there, her father in his best suit and her mother clutching a tissue, made Nora's eyes water. These were the people who had raised her to value honesty and hard work, who had supported her dreams of becoming a journalist, even when it meant she'd be far from home and struggling financially for years. Ethan's family was there too, of course. Margaret had arrived looking like she was attending a state dinner, but Nora could see the anxiety in her posture. James sat beside her, his hand resting reassuringly on her arm, a small gesture that reminded Nora of Ethan's description of his parents. Still holding hands after 40 years of marriage, Emily was in the front row, and when she caught Nora's eye, she mouthed, "You've got this." It was exactly what Nora needed to hear. The hearing itself was surprisingly anticlimactic in some ways, but emotionally intense in others. Both sides presented their evidence, their witnesses, their arguments about the validity of engagement contracts and the nature of genuine affection. Lauren's testimony was polished and convincing. She spoke about her history with Ethan, their family's long friendship, the engagement ring that had belonged to Ethan's grandmother. She painted a picture of a love that had endured despite obstacles, of a woman who had been patient and understanding even when her fiancé had seemed to lose his way. "I know Ethan was under tremendous pressure," Lauren said, her voice carefully modulated to suggest both strength and vulnerability. "The business world can be overwhelming, and I understand why he might have felt he needed to create a different kind of image, but what he and I have is real history, real commitment, real love that has withstood the test of time." When Ethan's turn came, he was direct and honest in a way that surprised even Nora. He didn't try to paint Lauren as a villain or minimize their relationship. "Lauren and I did have a real relationship," he said clearly, "and yes, there were genuine feelings involved. But what I've learned over the past few months is that there's a difference between loving someone and being in love with someone. There's a difference between a relationship that looks perfect on paper and one that challenges you to become a better person." He looked directly at Nora as he continued, "When I met Nora, I wasn't looking for love. I was looking for a solution to a professional problem. But what I found was someone who saw through all my defenses, who called me on my mistakes, who made me want to be worthy of her respect before I ever wanted her love." Ethan's voice grew stronger as he spoke. "Your Honor, I can't stand here and say that Nora and I met in a conventional way or that our relationship followed traditional patterns, but I can say that what we have now, the trust, the partnership, the daily choice to support each other's dreams, even when they complicate our own, that's more real than anything I've ever experienced." When it was Nora's turn, she had planned to be composed and professional, but seeing her parents in the gallery, Ethan's family in the front row, and the expectant faces of everyone who had followed their story, she found herself speaking from the heart in a way she hadn't expected. "Your Honor, 3 months ago, if someone had told me I would be standing in a courthouse defending my marriage to Ethan Caldwell, I would have laughed, not because I didn't think he was worthy of love, but because I didn't think someone like me belonged in his world. Nora paused, gathering her thoughts. I grew up in a two-bedroom house in Ohio. My parents saved for months to buy me a laptop for college. I've spent my entire career fighting to be taken seriously in a world that often dismisses young female journalists as either too ambitious or not ambitious enough. She looked at Ethan, who was watching her with the expression she'd come to love, the one that said she was exactly where she belonged. When Ethan pulled me into that first lie, I thought I was entering into a simple business arrangement. I thought I could maintain my professional distance, get the story I needed, and walk away unaffected. I was wrong about all of that. Nora's voice grew stronger. I was wrong because Ethan Caldwell turned out to be nothing like the arrogant tech mogul I expected to find. Yes, he's driven and ambitious, and sometimes frustratingly confident in his own abilities. But he's also the man who noticed I take my coffee with almond milk and started keeping it stocked in his office kitchen. He's the man who read every article I've ever written and remembered details I had forgotten. He's the man who supported my decision to maintain my journalistic independence, even when it meant I might write stories that reflected poorly on his company. The courtroom was completely silent now, everyone hanging on her words. The question isn't whether our marriage started as a business arrangement, she continued. The question is whether it became something more, and I can tell you that what Ethan and I have now, the trust, the partnership, the way we support each other's dreams, even when they conflict with our own, that's not something you can fake. That's not something you can manufacture for the cameras or the stock prices or anyone else's approval. Nora paused, glancing at Lauren, who was sitting with her legal team, looking increasingly uncomfortable. Ms. Mitchell spoke about real history and real commitment. But I would argue that real commitment isn't about how long you've known someone or how perfectly your family's social circles align. Real commitment is about choosing each other every day, even when it's difficult. It's about being willing to grow and change and become better people because of your relationship. She turned back to the judge. Your Honor, I fell in love with Ethan Caldwell not because he's wealthy or successful or because marrying him would benefit my career. I fell in love with him because he makes me want to be the best version of myself. Because he sees the person I am underneath all my professional ambitions and loves her anyway. Because when I'm with him, I'm not pretending to be anyone else. I'm just me, and that's enough. The emotion in her voice was unmistakable now. And if that's not real love, then I don't know what is. The silence that followed was profound. Nora could hear her own heartbeat, could see her mother wiping away tears, could feel Ethan's eyes on her like a physical touch. Judge Bennett called for a recess, and Nora found herself surrounded by well-wishers in the hallway. Her parents hugged her tightly. Margaret Caldwell told her she'd never been prouder of anyone, and Emily whispered that Ethan looked like he was about to spontaneously combust from pride. But it was Ethan's reaction that mattered most. He pulled her aside, away from the crowd, and just looked at her for a long moment. That was, he started, then stopped. Nora, that was the most beautiful thing anyone has ever said about me, about us. It was just the truth. It was more than that. It was you fighting for us in front of a room full of people who will judge every word you said. It was you being willing to be vulnerable and honest about your feelings, about your background, about what this relationship means to you. Ethan cupped her face in his hands. I am so proud to be your husband. Fake, real, or anything in between. Before Nora could respond, Elizabeth appeared with her usual stack of papers and serious expression. They're ready to resume, she announced. The judge took longer than expected to return with his decision. Nora and Ethan sat in the courtroom, their hands clasped tightly together, watching their lawyers huddle in whispered conferences while reporters shifted restlessly in their seats. When Judge Bennett finally returned, he looked every bit as tired as Nora felt. The past month of media coverage and legal briefs had clearly taken its toll on everyone involved. This case, the judge began, has required me to consider some unusual questions about the nature of marriage, commitment, and the evolution of romantic relationships in the modern era. Nora held her breath. I have reviewed contracts, testimonies, financial documents, and hours of media coverage. I have listened to arguments about the legal validity of engagement agreements, the nature of binding commitments, and the definition of authentic emotional connection. The judge paused, looking around the courtroom. What I have concluded is that while relationships may begin in unconventional ways, the law must recognize that genuine emotional bonds can develop regardless of initial circumstances. The question before this court is not whether Mr. Caldwell and Ms. Harper's relationship began as a business arrangement, but whether it has evolved into something legally and emotionally meaningful. Nora felt Ethan's hand tighten around hers. After reviewing all the evidence, testimony, and documentation provided by both parties, I find that while Mr. Caldwell and Ms. Mitchell did indeed have a contractual engagement agreement, the prolonged separation and Mr. Caldwell's subsequent actions constitute a clear intention to dissolve that agreement, regardless of whether formal paperwork was filed. Lauren's face went white. Furthermore, Judge Bennett continued, I find that the evidence supports the conclusion that Mr. Caldwell and Ms. Harper entered into their marriage with genuine intent to create a committed partnership, regardless of the unconventional circumstances of their initial meeting. Nora felt tears of relief starting to form. However, the judge said, and Nora's Lufic heart stopped, because there appears to be some question about the legal validity of Mr. Caldwell and Ms. Harper's initial ceremony, and because this case has raised important questions about the intersection of personal relationships and professional obligations, I am ordering that if they wish their marriage to be legally recognized, they must participate in a formal ceremony within 30 days of this ruling. The courtroom erupted in noise, reporters shouting questions, lawyers gathering papers. What sounded like applause from somewhere in the gallery. Nora could barely process what had happened. Did we win? She whispered to Ethan. I think so, he replied, looking equally stunned. But apparently, we have to get married again. We were going to do that anyway. Right. But now it's court-ordered. Nora started laughing. She couldn't help it. After everything they'd been through, the fake engagement, the real feelings, the media circus, the legal battle, they were being ordered by a judge to do what they'd already decided to do. As the courtroom continued to buzz with activity around them, Ethan stood and pulled Nora to her feet, spinning her around as photographers captured the moment. Nora Harper, he said, setting her down but keeping his arms around her. Will you marry me again? For real this time? By court order? Ethan Caldwell, she replied, grinning up at him despite her tears. I thought you'd never ask properly. I mean, is that a yes? That's a yes to everything. The court order. The real wedding. The rest of our lives together. He kissed her then, right there in the courthouse hallway, with half the New York press corps taking pictures and his ex-fiancée probably watching from somewhere in the crowd. But Nora didn't care about any of that. She cared about the way Ethan held her like she was precious, the way he tasted like coffee and promises, the way he made her feel like the luckiest woman alive. When they broke apart, the reporters were shouting questions, and Elizabeth was trying to clear a path to the exit, but Ethan only had eyes for Nora. So, he said, his forehead resting against hers, ready to plan a wedding in 30 days? Ready to marry you in 30 days? Nora corrected. The wedding is just paperwork. The marriage is what matters. Have I mentioned lately that I love you? Only about 50 times today, but I don't mind hearing it again. I love you, Nora Harper, my fake wife, my real fiancée, my future actual wife. I love you too, Ethan Caldwell, my accidental husband, my intentional partner, my favorite mistake that turned into the best decision of my life. As they made their way through the crowd and out of the courthouse, Nora thought about everything that had led them to this moment. The panicked lie that had started it all, the careful charade that had become genuine affection, the fake marriage that had grown into real love. It wasn't the love story she'd ever imagined for herself. It was better because the best love stories, Nora had learned, weren't the ones that followed the script. They were the ones that started as accidents and became choices, that grew from deception into truth, that proved that sometimes the most authentic connections came from the most artificial beginnings. 3 months later, Nora Caldwell, legally this time, stood in the Caldwell family garden in the Hamptons, wearing a dress that Margaret had insisted on buying and holding a bouquet that Emily had personally arranged. The ceremony was small, intimate, everything their first wedding hadn't been. The guest list had been carefully curated, family, close friends, and a select few reporters who had covered their story fairly. Nora's college roommate had flown in from Seattle. Ethan's business school friends had come from around the country, and even Judge Bennett had accepted their invitation to attend, though he'd politely declined their request for him to officiate again. Instead, they'd asked Nora's childhood pastor from Ohio to perform the ceremony. Reverend Thompson had known Nora since she was 12 and had watched her grow from an ambitious teenager into the woman she'd become. Having him there felt like bringing her two worlds together in the most meaningful way possible. The morning of the wedding, Nora woke up in her childhood bedroom. She'd spent the night at Margaret's insistence, claiming it was bad luck for the groom to see the bride before the ceremony. Even if they were already legally married in the eyes of everyone but the state of New York, Margaret knocked on the door at exactly 8 a.m., carrying a breakfast tray and wearing the expression of a woman on a mission. "Good morning, dear," she said, setting down a tray that contained fresh fruit, croissants, and coffee, prepared exactly how Nora liked it. "How are you feeling?" "Nervous," Nora admitted, sitting up in bed, "which is ridiculous since we're already married." "Nonsense. Every bride should be nervous on her wedding day. It means you understand the importance of what you're doing." Margaret sat on the edge of the bed, her expression growing serious. "Nora, I want you to know how grateful I am that Ethan found you." "Margaret, let me finish. When Ethan and Lauren were together, I knew it wasn't right. Oh, it looked perfect on paper. Same social circles, compatible families, shared interests, but there was no spark, no challenge, no growth. They were both just playing the roles they thought they were supposed to play." Margaret reached over and took Nora's hand. "But with you, Ethan became himself again. The curious, passionate, sometimes frustratingly idealistic young man he'd been before the business world convinced him he needed to be someone else." Nora felt tears threatening. "Thank you for saying that. I'm saying it because it's true. You make my son happy in a way I wasn't sure he was capable of being. And more importantly, you make him better." The next few hours passed in a blur of hair and makeup, last-minute adjustments to the dress, and the controlled chaos that seemed to surround any wedding, no matter how small. Emily had appointed herself wedding coordinator and was managing everything with military precision, while James handled the logistics of keeping the few reporters at a respectful distance. At exactly 4 p.m., Nora found herself at the back of the garden, her arm linked through her father's, looking down the short aisle toward Ethan, who was standing under an arch of white roses that the gardener had somehow coaxed into perfect bloom. He looked nervous, too, she realized with a smile. His usually perfect hair was slightly mussed, and he kept adjusting his tie. But when their eyes met, his face lit up with such pure joy that Nora felt her own nerves disappear. This was right. This was real. This was theirs. The ceremony itself was simple and heartfelt. Reverend Thompson spoke about love that grows from unexpected places, about partnerships built on mutual respect and shared values, about the courage it takes to commit to building a life with another person. Ethan's vows made her cry. He spoke about finding in Nora not just a partner, but a person who challenged him to be worthy of her faith in him. He promised to support her dreams even when they took her away from him, to trust her judgment even when it conflicted with his own, and to love her not just for who she was now, but for who she was still becoming. Nora's vows were about choosing each other every day, about building something together that was stronger than either of them could create alone. She promised to be his partner in all things, the exciting ventures and the mundane responsibilities, the public successes and the private struggles. "I promise to love you, not because it's easy," she said, her voice steady despite her tears, "but because choosing you every single day is the best decision I've ever made." When Reverend Thompson pronounced them husband and wife for real this time, he added with a smile that made everyone laugh, "Ethan kissed her with the kind of passion that made the small gathering of witnesses cheer. No regrets." Ethan murmured against her lips as their guests cheered around them. "Not a single one," Nora replied. "Best fake marriage ever. Here's to making the real one even better. Here's to 30 years of boring married life." "Boring?" Ethan grinned. "Nora Harper, I don't think you know the meaning of the word." He was right, of course. Their life together would be many things: complicated, challenging, occasionally chaotic, but it would never be boring. The reception was held on the terrace overlooking the water, with string lights and candles creating a warm glow as the sun set over the Sound. Nora found herself moving through the evening in a state of perfect contentment, dancing with her father, laughing with Emily's kids, accepting congratulations from friends and family who had supported them through everything. But the moment that meant the most came near the end of the evening, when she found herself alone with Ethan on the edge of the terrace, looking out at the water. "How does it feel?" he asked, sliding his arms around her from behind. "Being really married to you? It feels exactly like being fake married to you, except now I don't have to worry about when it's going to end." "Good answer." Ethan pressed a kiss to her temple. "Nora, yeah, thank you." "For what?" for taking a chance on us, for fighting for us, for making something real out of something that started as a complete disaster. Nora leaned back against his chest, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady rhythm of his breathing. Thank you for being worth fighting for, even when you pulled me into that insane lie in the first place. Especially then, because if I hadn't been desperate enough to grab a random journalist and pretend she was my wife, I never would have known that I could love someone enough to defend a fake marriage like it was real. And I never would have known that I could love someone enough to trust them with everything I'd built, even when it meant risking everything I thought I wanted. They stood there in comfortable silence, watching the lights of distant boats on the water, surrounded by the soft murmur of their families celebrating inside. "So, what happens now?" Nora asked eventually. "Now we go on our honeymoon, a real one this time. Not a business trip disguised as a romantic getaway. Where are we going?" "That depends. Do you want somewhere exotic and exciting or somewhere quiet where we can just be normal newlyweds?" Nora considered this. The past few months had been such a whirlwind of public attention and legal drama that the idea of anonymity sounded incredibly appealing. "Somewhere quiet," she decided. "Somewhere where nobody knows us and nobody cares about our story. Somewhere we can just be Ethan and Nora. I know just the place. My family has a cabin in the mountains of Vermont. No Wi-Fi, no cell service, no reporters, just us in the woods and all the time in the world to figure out how to be married without an audience." "That sounds perfect." "Good. Because I have plans for our first week as a really married couple." "What kind of plans?" "The kind that involve sleeping in until noon, making breakfast together, and spending entire days talking about everything except Caldwell Tech, or journalism ethics or legal strategies." Nora turned in his arms so she could see his face. "You want to talk? That's your big romantic plan? I want to learn everything about you that I don't already know. I want to hear about your childhood, your dreams, your fears, your favorite books and movies and songs. I want to know what you think about when you can't sleep. What makes you laugh when you're sad? What you hope our life will look like in 20 years. Nora felt her heart swell with love for this man who had started as a convenient lie and become the most honest relationship of her life. "I love you, Ethan Caldwell," she said simply. "I love you too, Nora Caldwell. My fake wife, my real partner, my favorite person in the entire world." "Your only wife," Nora corrected with a smile. "My only wife," Ethan agreed, spinning her around on the terrace as their families looked on from inside, smiling at the sight of two people who had found exactly what they hadn't known they were looking for. Epilogue. 1 year later, Nora Caldwell finished typing the last sentence of her article and leaned back in her chair, stretching arms that ached from hours of writing. Through the window of their home office, Ethan had finally convinced her to let him buy them a house in the village, complete with separate workspaces. She could see her husband in the garden, attempting to plant tomatoes with the focused intensity he usually reserved for board meetings. It wasn't going well. "How's the article coming?" Ethan called through the open window. "Just finished. Want to read it before I submit?" "Always." Nora saved the document and walked outside, handing Ethan her laptop while settling beside him on the garden bench they'd installed last spring. The article was her piece for Tech Chronicle's anniversary issue, "The Future of Corporate Ethics in AI Development." It had taken her 6 months to research and write, and she was proud of the balanced, thorough reporting that examined both the possibilities and pitfalls of artificial intelligence in business applications. Ethan read in silence, his brow furrowed in concentration. Nora watched his face, looking for any sign of concern or disapproval. Even after a year of marriage, real marriage, she sometimes worried about the potential conflicts between her role as his wife and her job as a journalist covering his industry. "It's brilliant," Ethan said, finally closing the laptop. "Thorough, fair, and it asks all the right questions, even the part about Caldwell Tech's government contracts. Especially that part. You managed to present the ethical concerns without making us look like villains, while still holding us accountable for responsible development." Ethan set the laptop aside and pulled Nora closer. "I'm proud of you. Even though I basically spent 6 months investigating your competitors and asking uncomfortable questions about AI regulation. Because you spent 6 months investigating my competitors and asking uncomfortable questions about AI regulation," Ethan corrected, "you kept your objectivity, maintained your professional standards, and wrote a piece that's going to start important conversations in the tech community." Nora leaned against his shoulder, feeling the familiar warmth of satisfaction that came from completing a challenging project. Remember when you thought marrying a journalist might be complicated? Remember when you thought marrying a tech mogul might compromise your integrity? Turns out we were both right. It is complicated, and it does require constant attention to professional ethics. But it's worth it. Even when I tried to interfere with your story about data mining practices last month. You didn't try to interfere. You had legitimate concerns about proprietary information. We discussed it like adults, and we found a solution that protected both journalistic integrity and business interests. Nora tilted her head to look at him. That's called being partners. Partners. Ethan repeated thoughtfully. I like that better than fake spouses who fell in real love. The media is never going to let us forget how we met. Good. I never want to forget how we met. Ethan pressed a kiss to the top of her head. Have I mentioned lately that I love you? Only every day, but I don't mind hearing it. I love you, Nora Caldwell, my real wife, my favorite journalist, my partner in all things, including completely failing to grow vegetables. Nora looked at the sad collection of crooked tomato plants and barely sprouting herbs that represented Ethan's latest attempt at domestic accomplishment. We could hire a gardener. Where's the fun in that? The fun would be in actually having vegetables to eat. Details. Nora's phone buzzed with a text from Emily. Family dinner Sunday. Mom's making her famous pot roast. No excuses. Your sister wants us for dinner Sunday, Nora said, showing Ethan the message. My sister wants you for dinner Sunday. I'm just the person who brings you. It was true. Over the past year, Nora had somehow become the Caldwell family favorite. Much to Ethan's mock indignation, Margaret called her for advice on everything from charity events to dealing with James's stubborn refusal to use his reading glasses. Emily texted her pictures of her kids and complaints about her husband's golf obsession. Even James, initially the most skeptical about their unconventional courtship, now sought Nora's opinion on Caldwell Tech's community outreach programs. I still can't believe they like me better than you, Nora said. You're more fun than I am. I'm not more fun. I'm just newer. Nora, you convinced my 5-year-old father to join Instagram so he could follow your articles. You taught my mother how to use Twitter to promote her charity work. You're definitely more fun. Nora's phone buzzed again, this time with a call from her editor. I should take this, she said, recognizing the number. Nora, just read your AI piece. Fantastic work as always. Listen, I've got a proposition for you. What kind of proposition? Book deal. There's a publisher interested in your take on tech journalism, ethics in reporting, and how personal relationships affect professional objectivity. Think All the President's Men meets You've Got Mail. Nora felt her pulse quicken. A book deal had been a dream of hers since journalism school. What's the angle? Your story. Obviously the journalist who married her subject and managed to maintain her professional integrity, but also broader themes, how modern relationships intersect with career ambitions, how to navigate ethical gray areas, that sort of thing. Nora looked at Ethan, who was pretending not to eavesdrop while obviously hanging on every word. Can I think about it? Of course, but don't think too long. This kind of opportunity doesn't come around often. After she hung up, Ethan was grinning at her with obvious pride. Book deal, he asked. Book deal. About us, partially, but also about journalism, ethics, and modern relationships. That's amazing, Nora. You have to do it. It would mean writing about our relationship, about the fake marriage, the legal battle, all of it. So, what if people think I'm exploiting our story for career advancement? Ethan stood and pulled her to her feet, his hands settling on her waist. Nora, what do you think you'd regret more? Writing the book and having some people question your motives, or not writing the book and always wondering what could have been? Nora considered this. Over the past year, she'd learned that her relationship with Ethan had actually made her a better journalist, not a compromised one. The experience of navigating professional ethics while maintaining personal relationships had given her insights she'd never had as a single reporter. Her writing had become more nuanced, more thoughtful about the human elements behind business stories. You really think I should do it? I think Nora Caldwell has a story worth telling, and I think she's the only person who can tell it right. What if it makes us look ridiculous? What if it helps other people figure out how to balance love and ambition? What if it shows that modern relationships can be complicated and still be authentic? Nora stood on her tiptoes and kissed him, tasting the future in his confidence. in his unwavering support for her dreams. "Okay," she said against his lips. "I'll write the book." "Good. When do you start?" "Right now, apparently. The publisher wants a proposal by next month. Then you'd better get writing. I'll handle dinner." "You're going to cook?" "I'm going to order takeout from that place you like and pretend I cooked. That's why I married you, your commitment to the illusion of domestic competence, among other reasons. I hope." Nora looked at her husband, her real husband, her chosen partner, her favorite accidental discovery, standing in their garden with dirt on his hands and love in his eyes, and plans for their future, written across his smile, among many other reasons. She agreed. As Ethan headed inside to figure out dinner and Nora settled back at her laptop to start outlining her book proposal, she thought about the story she was about to tell, the story of a fake marriage that became real love, and of professional ambition that learned to coexist with personal happiness, of two people who discovered that the best relationships were the ones that challenged you to become the person you never knew you could be. It wasn't the story she'd planned to write when she'd first started investigating Caldwell Tech 18 months ago. It was better because the best stories, Nora had learned, were the ones that surprised you, the ones that started as assignments and became adventures, that began with cynical questions and ended with hopeful answers. The ones that proved love didn't have to follow a script to be real. Nora Caldwell opened a new document and began to type. Chapter 1. The shout that started everything. And as the sun set over their imperfect garden and their perfectly complicated life together, she wrote their love story, the real one this time, with joy, honesty, and the absolute certainty that some of the best things in life were worth fighting for, even if they started as lies. Especially if they became truth.